Previously on Dr. Bronghorn's Megalong vlog, I fixed this Jeep after it'd been sitting for 14 years, and then I promptly broke it. And yeah, it turns out that I had to do a lot of work on the engine. First step was to drain all the coolant. I needed to do that anyway. This coolant was 14-year-old coolant, and it was on the list to get replaced. Then we had to pull the grill off to get to the front of the engine, and I didn't know the steps to do this, so I went ahead and pulled the radiator out. It's probably a good thing to do it this time because we were able to get it out and really flush it well and clean it up, but you don't actually have to pull the radiator in a Jeep to get the front off. I could just have disconnected the hoses and taken the entire grill with the radiator off as a unit. So get the radiator out. Now I proceed to remove the grill unit. It has headlights and blinkers in it. This is a series of, I think about 9 bolts. It's 4 on each fender, the 2 on the top, and then there's 1 in the middle that holds it on with a couple of rubber vibration insulating washers. Once you get all those free, you can just pull the whole thing off, and it's still tethered on by the electrical connection. It'd be nice if there was a quick release or something in that electrical connector, but there's not. So we just undo the clips and put it around to the side of the Jeep. I'll show a video of that later on. You can see it from the outside perspective. But you also have to pull out, because this is a later Jeep 77, it's got side marker lights, so you have to pull out the wires that supply the side marker lights. And then just undo the series of clips here that hold the wires to the driver's side fender. Once you've done that, Bob's your uncle, and that whole thing comes off, and you get perfect access to the engine. Honestly, having done all this work on a Jeep, it's really hard for me to want to go back to working on passenger cars again because everything is so easy to access. And it's so easy to work on. I've done stuff to the dashboard since then. That'll be a later video, not in this video, but so easy to take everything apart. I mean, it's like it was designed for being really easy to fix in wartime or something. Anyway, pulling off the pulley so we can get to the harmonic balancer. You can see my helper here, a guy who wanted me to call him Red Sweatshirt Guy in the video. So there you are, Red Sweatshirt Guy. This wouldn't have happened without you. And he was a good helper, both in helping me get this done, but also in keeping me honest about replacing things. Like I was going to reuse this harmonic balancer, and he insisted that, no, I should replace it. And he was right. It was actually pretty tired out. And it's one of those things that if it gives up, it can really do a lot of damage to the engine. Harmonic balancer serves to dampen vibrations created by the way the V8 engine moves. It's got a little rubber piece in it, so the outside and the inside are a little shock absorber connected with the rubber, and it can absorb the vibrations. I'm going to use a puller to get it off. You can see I actually put the bolt back into the crankshaft, but not all the way, so that I'd have a place to push on the puller. Now I'm turning the water pump off, and most of the bolts came off pretty easy, but there's one bolt on the bottom right of it that goes through the water jacket that had rusted in place. These are some of the bolts that hold that whole front timing cover on while I was off getting the torch to help get that one bolt loose on the water pump. Red Sweatshirt Guy was busy taking apart the rest of it. So here we are trying to use the hand impact tool and freezing it, blow torching it, hot, cold impact, like I did on the brake drums in my previous video. Eventually we used the breaker bar on it. I was really worried I was going to break it off in the block, and I was going to end up having to maybe even take the whole thing to a machine shop, which would have been a big hassle. Tapping on it with the hammer, lots of penetrating oil, and eventually it does come loose, and it makes this wonderful squeaking sound as it comes out. Here it comes. So I replaced that one and any of the other bolts that came out of the water pump area that had rust damage. I went to the hardware store and bought replacement hardware that was galvanized, hopefully reduce rust damage in the future. We also used anti-seize on all those bolts that were tough to get out. So hopefully they won't back themselves out over time, but if we have to take it apart in the future, they won't have the same corrosion problems these did. So here we can see that we're taking the water pump out. Got to get these old, stupid hose clamps off. I did end up replacing these eventually, but not in this video. I'll be in the subsequent video when I replaced all the coolant lines. I did cheap out and didn't replace the coolant lines here. Got to get the distributor off. so we can pull that whole front cover, and then I got to pull the alternator out. So red sweatshirt guy persuaded me to replace not only the harmonic balancer and the timing gear set, which is what I originally thought was broken here, but also the alternator, the gears in the oil pump, the fuel pump, and the gears that actually were broken in the distributor gear set. I think that's everything we replaced. We did a bunch of resealing of stuff too. You can see there's oil all over the front of the engine, grimy old oil. It turns out that's because here I'm showing for myself for future reference what the different sizes of the bolts are in different spots. I used that video to help me put it all back together again later. I'm very carefully tapping it off, but we discovered that it can't come off because there's 2 oil pan bolts still in the bottom. So you still have to get those oil pan bolts off for the front end to get that front cover off. Anyway, all that oil on the front's because, here's a spoiler, the oil seal around that harmonic balancer was installed wrong by a previous owner or previous mechanic, and so it caused us a lot of grief as we tried to reinstall it incorrectly following what we had removed, and finally found a machine shop that could help me out. So I'll tell more about that. But see, this is when I was discovering that the problem wasn't the timing gears themselves, but was actually the gear for the distributor drive had gotten chewed up. And there's all this stuff from the disassembly in the back of my Subaru. We plugged up those coolant passages when we had to leave it for a couple of weeks. There's the chewed up distributor drive gear needing to get replaced. And we packed it back up so it kind of looked decent while we weren't working on it. Turns out I had COVID. Didn't realize it, but I brought COVID back from Italy. So when I was doing that previous work with Red Sweatshirt Guy, I managed to actually have COVID at the time. I tested that morning out of precaution, and I didn't have, I tested negative, but then I tested positive the next day. So I told him, turned out we were outside, apart from each other. He didn't get it. He was vaccinated, everything's fine, but it was still frustrating. So after I was over my symptoms, I was still kind of stuck at the house, and so I used that time to take apart this front cover, get the fuel pump off, and get the oil pump disassembled so I could reassemble it with new gears. So the oil pump on these old AMC V8s is not a separate thing. It's actually built into that front timing cover, but you can replace the gear set inside of it. So here I am taking the oil pump off. There's like 9 little bitty bolts all the way around. And it was hard for me to see because it was so covered in grime, but there is actually a specific lip that sticks out for you to tap with the hammer to get it to come apart. I didn't realize that, so I wasted a little bit of time tapping around the edges to try to figure out how to get the 2 halves to come apart once the bolts were out. A lot of bolts. That's good. It holds it together. Wouldn't come apart immediately. So I took the time while it was still assembled to take the pressure relief valve apart here. So that's what this big bolt is. That's so that as you're pumping oil from the engine, if the pressure's too high, it'll go around the oil filter and it won't blow up your oil filter. Turned out that the pressure relief valve was seized. The pieces of it had rusted in place, and so I soaked it in evaporust off camera, and I got it to loosen up and come out. And so then I was able to replace the pressure relief valve. So here I've got all the stuff just in a bucket. I'm going to use degreaser. This is an environmentally friendly degreaser that I use sometimes. Can't remember what it's called because I put it into a new bottle at one point because the old bottle wore out and I don't have the name on it. Anyway, got the oil pump and the front cover all cleaned up. Coming back, this is what it looks like when you take that grill assembly off as a whole unit. Just comes right off. Okay. Now we got to put the engine back together again. This is the fun part. So first step is scraping off all the old gasket where that front timing cover fits on. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I cut a lot of that out, but that was a long process. Got to get the gasket off of the old oil pump cover. Get really cleaned up. I use that brake clean to clean up a lot of surfaces. You know, it's supposed to be for brakes, but I use it for a lot of things. Now I'm getting the timing gears lined up so that I know it's set at top dead center. That makes it easier to install the new timing gears. So taking the bolt off that retains the camshaft stuff, took off the distributor driving gear and the elliptical that runs the fuel pump. Now I'm slowly wedging off the top and bottom, getting those gears off. Those original gears from 1977. Oh yeah, this is we did manage to get that oil seal out of the front timing cover, but it really got torn up in the process. We're going to throw it out anyway, but we couldn't get the new one back in. I got some more video of that later. But here I am reassembling the front cover, putting the fuel pump back on. I thought it would be easier to put it on off the engine. Turns out that was not correct, and I have to take it back off again later. But I was trying to get everything pre-assembled here. And then the instructions for the oil pump from the manual were that it needed to be completely packed with petroleum jelly so that it would have enough suction to draw oil in to start it, to prime it when we start the engine back up. I actually make a tool for pre-priming it. I'll show you that in a little bit. But we still put the petroleum jelly in to make sure that we get that suction and prime it up. And of course, I didn't remember exactly how these two halves fit together, so I spent a little bit of time futzing around until I got them lined up, saving you the hassle of watching that. But anyway. You can see the little bits of the original AMC blue paint on there. I didn't bother to repaint anything because this is going to be an off-road vehicle and it doesn't have to be beautiful. These are the new timing gears. I believe these are Edelbrock timing gears I got. And I lined them up to have the stock timing. You can actually, they're set up to let you do advanced or retarded timing if you want to affect the engine's power curve and torque curve, but I just wanted to keep it stock. But I replaced them, replaced the original ones because the original ones had, as you could see in the previous video segment, they had nylon teeth on that cam gear, and those are notorious for breaking and ruining your day because it'll cause all of the pistons to run into the valves, and then you get bent push rods and stuff. I got a bag full of bent push rods when I got the Jeep, and so I think what had happened is that on a previous set of timing gears had grenaded in this engine, and the previous owner had already done some of the service back in the 80s. And that's when that oil seal got installed backwards. So here we are, red sweatshirt guy and me trying to install that oil seal, won't go. Okay, so harmonic balancer. I bought this Professional Products one on Summit. It's great, but the instructions for the AMC weren't in the package. You have to go on their website and download how to use it on an AMC engine. And so you have to switch out the weights. If you're using the 304 like I am, it comes set up for the like the big engine. So putting the new weight in, and then I'm putting Loctite on the Allen keys as per the instructions because I don't want it to come apart while I'm driving. That would be bad. And I'm just paranoid. I'm double checking as I go to make sure that it looks like the weights are distributed the same way on the old harmonic balancer and the new one. They are. And then at the end I show that the timing marks actually line up correctly. So here I've got them stacked up. And look, the timing marks are perfectly aligned when I align the cotter keys on the inside, or the Woodruff keys. Yeah. Okay, I got a different oil seal that I thought might work. I tried a bunch of different ways to install it. None of them worked. I took it to a machine shop. He tried to install it, and it didn't work because it turned out it was the wrong oil seal. So I was able to find one oil seal in Eugene at an AutoZone, took it back to the machine shop. He got it installed in like 20 minutes. It was a $20 job. So that's great. But he showed me that the previous one had been installed backwards. And when I went back and checked the Haynes manual, sure enough, the correct way to install it is the way that he put it together. So lesson learned. So what I've done here is taken the old distributor and gutted it, took the gears off so that I can insert it into the engine and then run it with the electric drill to run the oil pump without the engine running and push oil through the oil pump and into the oil passages and pre-lubricate everything so that when I start it back up, it's actually already got oil up in the top of the engine. It's a trick I learned watching Roadkill. I think Freiberger does that. Anyway, if you got an extra old distributor, that's a handy thing to do. So you can see here I've replaced a bunch of the hardware. All of those shiny gold bolts are the ones that I replaced because the old ones had rusted out. They didn't rust out, but they were rusty, and so I just figured better to replace them with ones that have some kind of galvanized coating. Okay, got the water pump on. Now we got to get the harmonic balancer on. And the problem is that we couldn't get it hammered on far enough for the short bolt that's the regular bolt to draw it in. So I went to the hardware store and bought a longer bolt with the same thread pattern so I could install that briefly, use the big wrench here to draw it down enough that I could then install the final bolt. And then we get it pulled all the way up to the engine and torque it appropriately to the proper torque spec. Felt pretty clever, realizing I could just go buy a longer bolt and use it temporarily. I got to get the pulleys back on. I didn't show it, but I rail can blacked the pulleys and a bunch of the other hardware that had surface rust. Some of them, actually all of them I soaked in evapor rust too. Yeah. So all this work is happening like 2 weeks later after things came in the mail, and also I was over COVID and no longer communicable. Yeah, so we're at the point we're getting that grill reinstalled. I'd forgotten to get the wires in for the side marker lights. We actually had to unbolt and then rebolt the fenders once, because you got to get those side marker light wires in before you bolt the fenders together. Okay, then the radiator has to go back in. Getting really close now, which is exciting. On that day when we were doing this, I thought we were going to get all the way through and get the engine to start, but as you can see, we ran into a problem with that really crazily bent hard fuel line from the fuel pump. It's been bent multiple times by different people over the years, including us, and no longer would it fit around the distributor. So here what I'm doing, we just refilled the radiator. I just put water in for now because it was still summertime. Now I've got my old distributor in to prime the oil pump. So I'm just running it with the electric drill, and actually we had the ignition turned on so we could see the gauges, and it did create pretty good oil pressure inside the engine as I just turned it with the electric drill. So I felt pretty good about pre-oiling and making sure that the oil pump was primed before we started it, because there's a lot of stress on the engine when it does actually start up. Okay, so now we got the HEI distributor in. We're trying to figure out how to get that hard fuel line to fit. It won't. So I went to the auto parts store the next day. I bought a new hard line to replace it and the tools to bend and cut it properly and to flare the end so that the fuel line will fit onto it. So that's the flaring tool to make the fuel line, rubber fuel line fitting. So I made my first bend already to get it around the bottom of the distributor. Now I'm marking where I need it to bend up again so I can go towards the carburetor. I put it into the bendy thing, and there you go, got my bend in. Now I'm just measuring with the fuel hose where it needs to get cut off. This is a little pipe cutter, cuts it cleanly there. I don't show it, but I deburred it and put the thing on the end, and then I got it to start up. This is it running again finally. So after all that work, we took the front end of the engine completely apart, put it back together. It started right up, charging with the new alternator. Got oil pressure, actually much better oil pressure than I had before. I was worried a little while that I had too high oil pressure. You see 46, 45, 0. I just put that in so I could remember what the mileage was as I drive it. I took it to work a little bit. I got some great pristine looking pictures at night when the ash was falling from the forest fires. And then I realized that the passenger side seat belt didn't work. I wanted to be able to take people on rides with this Jeep, but I needed a working seat belt. Rather than taking everything apart, I realized I could just remove the buckle from the back seat, the same buckle, and put it on that front seat belt. You know, the inside of the buckle had rusted too much and it would no longer properly latch up. The belts seem okay, although I do eventually want to replace them and probably put shoulder belts in. And I'm probably going to replace these seats too with high back seats just for safety. But for now, I wanted to have a seat belt. And so the easiest thing was just to actually cut the stitching on the ends of the free end of the belt so I could slide the buckle off and move it up to the front. It's a very Alan Grant Jurassic Park brute force solution. To be able to feed the belt back into the buckle, you actually have to take the plastic dust cover off. I think that's how it's designed. There was no way it was going to go around the corner without taking the dust cover apart. But it's pretty easy. I'm just checking before I put the dust cover on, still works. Back together. Now I have a working seat belt in the front. And then because it got colder, I wanted to have the bikini top. It was super gross from sitting for so long, so I washed it. I just have a before picture there, and the doors, I needed to clean them up too. Now the bikini top is not perfect, but I don't want it to be. I actually kind of like the patina of having had it sit for so long. Here's the process of installing it on the Jeep. So there's a plastic strip that fits into this little groove across the front of the top of the windshield. You get in all the way across, and there's two snaps, one on each side, that holds it in place. And then in the back, there are these two straps that go down to these little hold downs, and that creates this top that just goes over that front seat area. And actually, with the doors on, it makes enough of a pocket that it stays pretty warm. I had to adjust the strikers on the doors so they would hit the side of the body, since there's no top behind them to hit. But once I got it put together right, it was no problem to go bikini top doors only. I do have the original hard top, but it's original soft top, excuse me, but it's in really bad shape, so I'm going to be remaking it in a new video, in another video. Here we are driving around with the bikini top and doors on, just so you can see what it looks like. It's fun to get the Jeep out in the world. I also washed it at this point, so that just improves the look of it a lot. Once that was done, I went ahead and replaced the gear oil in both the differentials and in the transmission and transfer case, but that's not a really photogenic process, so I don't have any video of it. Driving it to work a few times, I managed to park it by other Jeeps. It's always entertaining to find fellow Jeeps. And then I took it back to Cars and Coffee, sort of to bookend the summer, since I'd taken it to Cars and Coffee at the beginning of the summer, and then it broke down on the way back. So this was a little bit of a triumphant return, and I made it back to Eugene without breaking down, which was always nice. Yep. Yep, here it is out in the wild some more. And then my son helped me get some action video. So we're going to end up with just some off-road driving action video as a payoff for doing all of this work. Thanks for watching the video. So here's your payoff. Thanks for watching my second Jeep video. Of course, more to come. I'm going to fix that soft top up. I got another video where I replaced the gauges in the speedometer, so I have to replace the temperature and fuel gauge, get them working again. And more content, road trips and things coming up. You, of course, can buy your own Dr. Pronghorn's Make Along Vlog t-shirts and sweatshirts at the link that's below the video. And if you like this video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate your time. Thanks.